Target Africa is a brilliant and disturbing book that paints racism in a way few of us have ever thought about. Sure, we all know that Black Lives Matter, whether or not we agree with the tactics of the group named Black Lives Matter. But what if the worst racists aren't police officers who might occasionally kill a suspect while making an arrest? Since all black lives certainly matter, the worst racists must be those who prevent blacks from ever being born. So what if the worst racists are Western government aid agencies and private charities that push abortion, contraception, and population control agendas on Africa? This is the focus of Target Africa. Author Obianuju Eckeocha recalls growing up in independent Nigeria, proud of the Nigerian flag and singing the Nigerian national anthem in school. Her parents, born before independence, had the Union Jack and sang God Save the King. The feeling of being colonized still exists. Bekiwu Agbara, roughly translated, the white man is spirit. So the Africans tend to follow recommendations of so-called experts from the West and accept the strings attached when Europe and America give $43 billion a year, even with conditions including measures like population controls that may support Western values and priorities rather than African ones. Eckeocha introduces the term philanthropic racism, the idea expressed in the old Kipling poem, The White Man's Burden, which says whites are morally obligated to help the slothful heathen of inferior races. And then quotes a British aid agency, every pound spent on family planning can save governments nearly £6 on healthcare spending, housing, water, and other public services. In other words, invest in genocide. People who are never born will never need help. The chapter on population control busts many myths. While many Westerners still believe Paul Ehrlich's 1968 book, The Population Bomb, which wrongly predicted mass starvation and resource shortages, Obianuju calls the population increase a boom rather than a bomb, as Africa's young and growing workforce could eventually make it the world's most dominant economy. Meanwhile, 83 other countries had fertility rates below replacement level. Germany and Italy could see their populations halved within the next 60 years. Many demographers expect a global crash to be underway by 2076. This will result in labor shortages, loss of tax revenue, increased public debt, and unsustainable health and welfare programs. She describes the depopulation of Japan, where the elderly suffer from loneliness and terrible care, especially in rural areas, when all the young people have to leave to work in the cities. The book was written in 2018. Things have only gotten worse. Meanwhile, she cracks the overpopulation myth, giving the example of Ethiopia, with a population density of 82.6 per kilometer, compared to 302 in the United Kingdom. The solutions to the slums is not depopulation, but rather investment in rural Africa. And while the Western depopulation gurus complain that Africa's high birth rate is due to a lack of contraceptives, surveys of African women show the high birth rate is because those women want to have lots of children. I can say with certainty that Africans love babies. Even among the poorest in the developing world, a child is considered not just a mouth to feed, but a gift to the family and the community. Similarly, as the so-called Western experts call for more abortion to reduce the number of women dying in childbirth, Africans would prefer better health care and save those women without abortion. The disconnect between Western and African values becomes apparent with family planning conferences, well attended by reps of big pharma corporations and abortion providers headquartered in the US and Britain. While in African culture, family planning starts with marriage, Western family planning treats sex more as a pleasure sport, and these conferences promoted a hedonistic, individualistic, selfish view of sex. The danger is undisclosed. Blood clots, sinusitis, nausea, migraines, cardiovascular diseases, notably stroke and heart attack, ovarian cysts, heavier periods, depression, anxiety, weight gain, hair loss, uterine perforation, pelvic inflammatory disease, osteoporosis, breast cancer, and death are among the side effects disclosed by pharmaceutical manufacturers in the fine print inserts that come with your contraceptive drugs and devices. Yet these side effects are rarely discussed by the promoters of contraception or even by the doctors who prescribe them. A series of contraceptive horror stories follows. Norplant users were reporting so many problems that by 1999 it was withdrawn in the UK. And in the US, cash settlements were paid to 36,000 women who suffered serious side effects, but it wasn't discontinued globally until 2008. Profits kept rolling in since African women are unlikely to get money from any class action lawsuits. Then there are 20,000 US lawsuits against Bayer's Yaz and Yasmin pills, alleging horrible side effects, including 100 deaths. Bayer continued to sell the product despite having already settled thousands of cases for millions of dollars. Obianuju reports that there were 77 million units of various birth control pills donated to African countries. But does anyone sort out which of these have serious side effects? Or if they're donated to Africa because they're banned elsewhere? DMPA is the contraceptive that has been most assiduously pushed among African populations. Plenty of horror stories about DMPA, also known as Depo-Provera. Interesting that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation partly funded a study that showed the drug may double the risk of getting HIV. Yet the foundation still launched the product in many African nations. Another study showed a large increased risk of breast cancer, and Pfizer's had a staggering number of prosecutions regarding bone density loss. Now there's this warning label. Depo-Provera may cause you to lose calcium stored in your bones. The longer you use Depo-Provera, the more calcium you are likely to lose. The calcium may not return completely once you stop using Depo-Provera. Loss of calcium may cause weak bones that can increase the risk that your bones might break, especially after menopause. It is not known whether your risk of developing osteoporosis may be greater if you are a teenager when you start to use Depo-Provera. And the conclusion of the chapter is that the insistence of reducing the population of Africa, no matter what the cost to the Africans themselves, is racism, imperialism, and colonialism disguised as philanthropy. Chapter 2, the hypersexualization of youth. The chapter talks about CSE, Comprehensive Sexuality Education, a curriculum that could be described as the Western Sexual Liberationists' official handbook. The same ideas are pushed by various UN groups, and the most radical of activists want access to CSE considered a basic human right, even though its implied culture and values disagree with those of most Africans, who tend to be more conservative on the issue. The AIDS epidemic allowed Western groups to advance their free love agenda on Africa. The World Health Organization, the US government, and other groups funded a campaign to fight AIDS in Kenya, where critics called it the Condoms for Kids campaign, as the Kenyan government introduced a bill to parliament that would allow children to receive condoms and birth control without parental consent. Similarly, in Natal province in South Africa, every government department and municipal office offered free condoms. This actually made the AIDS problem worse. The pro-condom lobby gave people a false impression that they were protected, and free condoms only encouraged people to take more risks with more partners. Uganda, however, tried an all-African solution, the ABC Prevention Plan, an educational program based on A, abstinence before marriage, B, be faithful in marriage or to one partner, and C, condom use if A and B are impossible, though the C was mostly meant for sex trade workers. The program was a huge success, with new HIV infections dropping 70%. But rather than replicate Uganda's success elsewhere, aid agencies criticized the idea, stopped funding it, and returned to their condom campaigns. And infection rates started to creep up again. Another crazy idea of the Western experts at the International AIDS Conference was to fight AIDS by decriminalizing sex work. I don't see how this would help. The ulterior motive seems to be to destigmatize the sex trade. Even crazier ideas are expressed in International Planned Parenthood's publication, Healthy, Happy, and Hot, which encourages HIV-positive people to be sexually active, and HIV-negative people to have sex with HIV-positive ones. It argues against disclosing your HIV-positive status to a potential partner. Oh, that would violate your rights! And advises people to plan ahead if they will be having sex when they're drunk or high on drugs. And this is the kind of education the West pushes on African youth. The seeds of radical feminism. Obianuju says that feminism should seek to empower women so they could develop their human potential and contribute to society. It should elevate downtrodden women so they can radiate their goodness. Many African feminists share this view and work towards getting the vote, rights to own property, and to get an education for women in areas where they continue to be held back. It's similar to first wave feminism in the West, but there are additional issues in Africa. The practice of female genital mutilation in some areas, child marriage, and the horrors of sex slave trafficking. A great African feminist was Wangari Maathai, a Nobel Peace Prize winner for Sustainable Development, Democracy, and Peace, a political activist for women's issues, yet she was staunchly pro-life and anti-abortion. But as the author points out, other women's groups in Africa, often funded and trained by Western NGOs, follow second or third wave feminists of the West, ignoring the previously mentioned issues and instead focusing on no-fault divorce, abortion, legalizing prostitution, and promoting pornography and queer theory, a focus that faithfully regurgitates the shallow first world problems often touted by modern-day feminists. Go through the lists of the donors of the largest African women's groups, and you'll find pro-abortion Western funds like the Gates Foundation and Open Society, the George Soros Group, and even abortion providers like Planned Parenthood and IPAS. In fact, IPAS provided technical support for drafting some of the Maputo Protocol, particularly Article 14, which, if followed, would open the door to legal abortion throughout the entire continent. It isn't clear why the African Commission would ask for the advice of an American abortion provider to write a document that's supposed to represent African nations, or why other Western foundations would need to lobby African leaders and fund campaigns to encourage the ratification of the Maputo Protocol. Millions of dollars have been given to weaponize the 40 words of the article that provide a license to kill Africa's unborn children. Chapter 4, the push for abortion rights. The Western narrative, reinforced by the UN and the WHO, is that Africa needs more legal abortion because too many women are dying in childbirth or dying during illegal abortions. Obianuju flips the narrative once again. She cites the WHO's own global data, showing the main causes of maternal death are 27% from hemorrhage, 14% from hypertensive disorders, and 11% from sepsis. Logically, the best way to prevent maternal deaths would be to improve blood transfusion services. Women with excessive bleeding can't be helped by abortion anyway. Better hypertension management and sepsis treatment would also save lives. There is no telling how many lives could be saved if even a fraction of the billions of dollars being spent by Western donors on contraception and abortion in Africa were directed towards improving the quality of obstetric care. And while the WHO says 8% of maternal deaths are from abortion complications, there's no evidence that lower maternal mortality results from the legalization of abortion. South Africa, with abortion on demand, has a higher maternal mortality rate than Botswana, a poorer country without legal abortion. Some of the WHO's 8% figure comes from countries with legal abortion. It's a fake narrative that illegal abortions are all performed by quacks. Usually it's doctors trying to earn more money. And as more abortion access allows women to terminate unwanted pregnancies, it encourages more people to be sexually active. South Africa reports that 60% of abortions are performed on high school students. Shockingly, campaigns to promote abortion in Africa are spearheaded by Westerners. One example was a bill in 2013 to legalize abortion in Obianuju's home province of Imo, Nigeria. She points out support from the Women's Global Network for Reproductive Rights, a pro-abortion organization founded in the Netherlands and funded by the Swedish International Development Agency, the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, the Danish government, and numerous Western NGOs and donors. The bill was originally passed, but later rescinded by the governor after massive protests in the streets convinced him that abortion was an insult to the religious and cultural values of the people. Chapter 5, the normalization of homosexuality. Chapter 5 speaks of the weddings of the Igbos people of Nigeria, and describes how fertility is a central element to their ceremony. To cultures like this, gay marriages are not possible, no matter how much the partners love each other, as they cannot produce children. It's not that radical. In a later chapter, the author reminds us that Bill Clinton signed the Defense of Marriage Act in 1996, which defined marriage as the union of one man and one woman. But now Western interests who want to erode traditional African values weaponize the issue, hanging the homophobic label on Africans. Thus many ordinary Africans have been frightened into silence because anything less than total acceptance of homosexual behavior is considered hatred. And the author is no homophobe. Neither I nor anyone in my sphere of family or friends would ever condone or perpetrate an attack on a homosexual. Western media report when a lynch mob targets a gay, but ignores when lynch mobs kill petty thieves, drivers who strike pedestrians, and politicians caught for corruption. Mob justice is more the issue than homophobia. In 2013, Barack Obama used a state visit to Senegal as a platform to push for gay rights, while ignoring other issues more central to Africans, like income inequality and fighting poverty. In the same year, the US cut its funding for Uganda healthcare and policing, after Uganda passed an anti-sodomy law. Other Western countries also made similar cuts. The law included prison sentences for homosexual acts with minors, the disabled, and when one of the partners had HIV. Critics said the law meant jail time just for being gay, but clearly much of the intent was to fight the AIDS epidemic and protect vulnerable groups. The United Nations is a prominent neo-colonialist. In 2016, the UN produced a series of commemorative stamps promoting homosexuality and transgenderism, despite the opposition of African diplomats who accused the UN of spreading propaganda rather than focusing on issues that could unite nations. The UN's Universal Periodic Review is supposed to be a human rights group, but is really just a name and shame organization in which Western nations recommend African countries change their laws regarding same-sex issues, adoption rules, and even redefining the family in law. In the clashes that have resulted, many Western leaders have revealed themselves to be modern colonial masters, threatening to withdraw aid from countries such as Nigeria and Uganda unless they accept their global sexual agenda. And Obianuju also counters criticism from the European Union. For decades, European countries funded corrupt African dictators known for human rights abuses and rigged elections. Now they sanction countries based on their cultural understanding of human sexuality. Chapter 6. Modern-day Colonial Masters. Western ruling elites who are privileged, wealthy, and powerful are indeed behaving as though they are the rightful masters of Africa. It's just that now they don't aim to conquer territory, they aim to conquer culture, to control the way Africans act and think. Either way, colonialism is paternalistic. Colonizers believe that they rule other people for their own good. It's a recipe for disaster. The countries that spend the most money on promoting abortion in Africa all have low fertility rates, roughly 20% below replacement levels, creating their own demographic time bombs. American aid agencies were criticizing African campaigns to promote chastity while pushing for the sexual liberation in Africa, at the same time that STDs in their own country hit record levels. 40% of US births were to unmarried women, compared to 6% for Nigeria and 19% for Kenya. The chapter features some outrageous examples of neocolonialism. There's an email exchange from 2009 in which Planned Parenthood Federation of America asked Hillary Clinton to take advantage of an upcoming trade visit to Kenya as an opportunity to push for abortion rights. It didn't work, as Kenya added a fetal personhood amendment to its constitution. But apparently groups like Planned Parenthood believe they have the right to influence sovereign nations' constitutions. In 2015, a New York-based US NGO, the Center for Reproductive Rights, sued the Kenyan Ministry of Health over complications from supposedly unsafe abortions, somehow claiming to be an advocate for all Kenyan women of reproductive age. In another farcical case, a UK group called Population Matters gave carbon offset credits to people in exchange for donating for contraception and sterilization in Tanzania, Ethiopia, and other developing countries. Fun fact, per capita emissions in the UK were 135 times higher than in Ethiopia. Obianuju recounts traveling to Sierra Leone and seeing "I am Mr. Condom" billboards in every region, paid for by the UN Population Fund. And in 2016, the Ethiopian government had to destroy 69 million condoms paid for by international donors. They were defective. Too bad those donors didn't spend the same 2 million on access to clean drinking water. Not all Western politicians promote abortion. Famously, Ronald Reagan, as president, started the Mexico City policy, which cut federal grants to any NGOs that provided or promoted abortion in the third world. Bill Clinton restored the funding, George W. Bush cut it again, and Obama restored it. After Trump cut the funding again in 2017, various European governments and private donors, like Bill Gates, contributed tens of millions of dollars each to make up the shortfall, until Justin Trudeau committed Canada to spend $650 million a year, more than enough to offset all of Trump's cuts. The Canadian Development Minister at the time, Marie-Claude Bibeau, explained that contraception, and even abortion, is only a tool to end poverty and make an impact in terms of development and peace and security in the world. After Target Africa was published, Canada's contribution to third world population control increased to over $1 billion Canadian dollars a year and included funding illegal abortions, even after Joe Biden had reversed Trump's cuts to overseas abortions. Another problem is the influence of Western media on African culture. When the book was published, CNN had a massive audience, reaching a majority of African business decision makers, high earners, and opinion leaders. But few Africans realized how biased CNN was on issues like sexuality, abortion, and population control. Obianuju gives the example of Kermit Gosnell, an American abortionist convicted of hundreds of horrific abortion-related felonies, including strangling babies that were born alive during botched abortions. CNN barely covered the story. And when Planned Parenthood was caught illegally selling body parts from aborted babies, CNN coverage attacked the investigators who collected the evidence with undercover videos. In 2016, CNN CEO Jeff Zucker admitted that CNN was a little too liberal. In the years after Target Africa was written, Zucker himself resigned due to an illicit affair, and other CNN big shots were fired after various sex scandals, ranging from indecent exposure during a Zoom meeting to harassment to a producer jailed for 20 years for doing unspeakable things to girls as young as 9. These media people shouldn't be telling Africans or anyone else how they should live their lives. Chapter 7. Aid Addiction. Some African governments pay well. Nigerian legislators top the list, making the equivalent of $190,000 US per year in a country where millions of workers make $600 a year. Kenyan and Ghanaian legislators also do very well. The chapter documents famous corruption cases, from minor government officials caught with houses hoarded with cash, a Nigerian cabinet minister accused of accumulating $487 million through stolen government funds, and various presidents stealing public funds, including a general who died with a $4 billion fortune. With African governments so notorious for corruption, why would so many Western donors give them any money? The answer, of course, is that plenty of politicians are willing to accept money, even if it means selling out African principles by building abortion clinics or letting Westerners set the sex ed curriculum in schools. In 40 years since independence, Africa received about $400 billion in aid from the developed world. Now it's raking in $50 billion a year from donors, but that aid hasn't translated into better standards of living. Some countries have grown dependent on handouts. 40% of the annual budget of Malawi comes from foreign aid. The Ugandan government collects only 57% of the taxes due from its citizens. Rather than improve their collection system to get the rest, they depend on foreign aid to make up the difference. It's like a drug addiction, and over time, that dependency leaves them open to the power and leverage of the donors, who impose conditions that serve their own ideological interests. It explains how philanthropy moguls such as Bill and Melinda Gates can influence or even direct the population control agenda of entire nations. A major turning point for population control was the United Nations International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo, Egypt in 1994, with 20,000 delegates. At this event, the language of sexual and reproductive health was reshaped in terms of human rights, and respect for these newly discovered rights became the criterion for receiving humanitarian assistance. It was a call to action for population control. Within a year, funding for population control programs doubled. Annual expenditures reached $3.2 billion by 2002, with huge participation by Gates, as well as Rockefeller, Hewlett-Packard, Ford, and MacArthur foundations. And spending on population control continued to increase, reaching $12.4 billion in 2012, roughly 20 times the pre-Cairo score. At that point, aid for population control far exceeded aid for all other sectors, including health, education, and clean water. And the population gurus continued to ask donors for even more money. Obianuju claims that the multi-billion-dollar contraception interventions have largely failed. Many African women still don't trust them. Many others that used contraception later quit, maybe because of side effects, or maybe they wanted to have a baby, or maybe their partner was away. Either way, the population gurus would falsely chalk up disappointing contraception use to a lack of information or access, and redouble their efforts. And as long as people are being paid to promote it, the battle will continue. Aid has become the opium of the ruling classes of Africa. Chapter 8. Toward the Decolonization of Africa. In the quest for decolonization, Africa needs to combat corruption while overcoming aid dependency. The corruption makes Africa poorer, as much of the stolen government funds are laundered off the continent. By one estimate, Africa lost $854 billion in illicit capital flight from 1970 to 2008. The handouts made things worse. There's the analogy of giving alms to the poor. You put a smile on their face today, but what if we see the same poor beggar every day in the same place for the next 20 years, complaining about the same problems? Accountability is key. Governments that receive funding from their own citizen taxpayers should be more likely to serve their citizens' interests compared to governments funded by foreign donations that come with strings attached. One reason that development programs fail is that organizations that distribute foreign aid have a vested interest in keeping themselves going. Fix the problems now, and there's no longer a reason to justify donations, grants, and cushy salaries of aid employees in the future. Oops. The solution to fighting poverty is trade, not aid. Asian countries have been more successful than Africans in reducing poverty, largely due to pro-market policies. Life issues are also central to the chapter. Trying to stop people in the developing world from having children should be considered appalling, especially since doing so is not a development strategy, it's an invasion strategy, and that is the reason Africa must walk away from aid. The battle over language is critical, with colonizers redefining words like partnership, equality, and rights to suit their ideological slant. That's how killing an unborn baby can be framed as a safe abortion. Obianuju recounts a frustrating interview she had with the BBC, in which the anchor repeated that contraception was a human right. If you think that way, you'll think children are the cause of poverty and childless sex is a human right. And when this language is exported to Africa, it trashes support for African families and values. For another example of the BBC acting as a colonizer, check out my video, African Farmer Battles BBC Racists. Link in the description. Obianuju gives another example of the battle over language. At a UN meeting about the AIDS crisis that was ravaging Africa, a resolution from Malawi was amended by a Dutch delegate on behalf of European nations and the US. They changed the wording so much that even the Malawi delegate couldn't vote for it. The Dutch version cut out the recommendations that people should reduce their number of sexual partners and youth should delay their sexual debut to prevent AIDS. Sheesh. An African delegate summed it up. It's all about sex, sex, sex for them. And Obianuju calls on African leaders to speak proudly about their African cultures. If Western leaders can speak so unabashedly about the right to abortion, as if they're proud of the killing of their unborn, with matching confidence, African leaders should speak about the dignity of the unborn child and his right not to be killed. The appendix is a reprint of Obianuju Eckeocha's open letter to Melinda Gates from 2012, when the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was trying to raise an extra $4.6 billion for population control in Africa. It was addressed to Melinda Gates rather than Bill, woman to woman, mother to mother. The letter gets into some of the cultural and ethical issues discussed in the book, but also some practical ones. For example, Adverse side effects of contraceptives. Where Europe and America have their well-oiled healthcare system, a woman in Africa with a contraception-induced blood clot does not have access to 911 or an ambulance or a paramedic. No, she dies. The letter outlines better ways to spend the money to help Africans, particularly women. Good healthcare systems, especially prenatal, neonatal, and pediatric care. Food programs for children, working on the problem of malnutrition, but also giving another reason for parents to bring their children to nursery school, which will speed up their education. Good higher education opportunities that can put workers on par with similar professionals in other countries. Chastity programs that would reduce STDs, and long-term it would lead to happier marriages. Support for micro-business opportunities for women. Fortify already established NGOs that are aimed at protecting women from sex trafficking, prostitution, forced marriage, child labor, domestic violence, sex crimes, etc. Speaking of trafficking, after Target Africa was published, Bill and Melinda Gates divorced, and their foundation was divided between the two. A main reason for the breakup was Bill's association with convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Sad that a frequent flyer to Epstein Island would tell Africans, or anyone else, how to live their lives, especially in sexual matters. And apart from the depopulation agenda described in Target Africa, neocolonialism is rampant in other forms. Also on this channel is my video on Michael Schellenberger's Apocalypse Never. A major theme of the book is how Western-controlled institutions use climate change as an excuse to prevent Africa from rising from poverty. You might also be interested in Obianuju's YouTube channel or Spotify podcast. I'll put links in the description if you want to learn more about her important work. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to the Book Nook for more thought-provoking books.